Welcome to the History Anecdotes channel. Have you always had the impression that the history of mankind that we are taught is partial and incomplete? That only the memorable, glorious events that have had an impact on the way societies function are presented? But what about the elements that are considered insignificant, but which may also prove essential to understanding the historical social contexts? And don't they bring history to life? We're here to talk about these anecdotes from history. We'll have two anecdotes, one true and one false. Make sure to stay until the end of the video to find out which one is false. This week, we're going to travel far back in time as well as in space. We're going to be talking about an emblematic figure from 6th century BC China, Confucius, more commonly known as Confucius. He was born in 551 BC and left his mark not only on his era but also on today's culture with the development of his philosophy, Confucianism. Confucianism became the state religion during the Han Dynasty, which began in 206 BC. Nevertheless, it is important to realize that Confucianism never founded a religion in the way that we imagine it through the prism of our Western societies. In fact, he was interested in mankind, excluding the notions of spirit and death. This cult, which was nevertheless dedicated to him, was not officially abolished until the 20th century. This philosophy is often described as a humanist philosophy, in which the belief that ordinary people are capable of changing their destiny is central. Confucius' thought revolves around education as a source of virtue. His starting point is the observation that man cannot live with wild animals, and that he must therefore live in society and deal with his fellow human beings, which requires him to establish a solid network of values. In particular, he spells out three fundamental virtues: science to dispel doubts, kindness to bring inner peace and well-being, and courage to oppose fear. Speaking of this last virtue, did you know that Confucius had to experience firsthand the need for courage? Indeed, like any philosopher, he set himself the task of developing a new way of thinking that was partially at odds with the current one. Nevertheless, when we speak of fear, we can think of physical dangers rather than moral ones, especially in the context of the times under consideration, which is marked by numerous wars. I'm not telling you all this without reason, because something that may seem surprising happened in Confucius' life. And this is where we can talk about the first anecdote. Confucius, a member of a family of warriors for several generations, took part in the civil war against the Zhou dynasty, and was shot in the liver by an imperial guard. Despite his poor condition, he survived. He associated this with a miracle and a sign. It was from this moment on that he began to reflect on the notion of morality and benevolence in the different strata of society in order to make it more ethical and functional. To give a fuller picture of Confucius' thinking and a better understanding of his life, we'll start by looking at his family background and childhood. The second anecdote concerns the genealogy of the Confucius family. What do you think of if I tell you Genghis Khan? You will tell me that he was certainly the greatest conqueror of all time, that he was the head of the Mongol Empire, and that his conquest was not without tears and blood. But you could also tell me that his brutal annexation of villages and towns left a very large number of descendants. Well, it's not him, but the family of Confucius, a philosopher, who has the largest family tree ever recorded. There are 2 million known descendants, and an estimated 3 million. His father was a descendant of Yi, prime minister of Qingtang, the founder of the Shang dynasty. Despite this, Confucius began his life in very difficult circumstances. When he was just 3 years old, his father died, leaving his family in poverty. As you might expect, he developed a taste for literature from an early age. He initially took on the role of tutor. He began by developing his influence in the land of Qi, with Duke Jing even wanting to delegate affairs of state to Confucius. This did not happen, however, because one of the duke's advisors feared for his job. He is said to have met the father of Taoism, Laozi, whose words had a profound impact on him. Laozi is said to have said the following: according to tradition, wealthy people give gifts to their hosts and poor people give words. As I am not well off, I can nevertheless give you some words. An intelligent man, a great observer, will always be in danger of death, because he enjoys talking about others. Through his vast knowledge and sound judgment, he comes to discover what is most despicable about others. To be a son is to be a mere subject, dispossesses the self. Fortunately, his political career did not end there. A series of events led him to the position of Grand Minister of Justice in the country of Lu. In 530 BC, following the death of his mother, he taught his disciples the knowledge of ancient texts that he had acquired over several decades. As you can imagine, this character followed values from which he never wavered. An example of this would be when he decided to resign as minister when the Duke of Lu abandoned his position as ruler for 3 days to indulge in lust with 3 dancers. So, in 497 BC, he set off on a 13-year journey. During this time, he unwillingly gathered many disciples. Nevertheless, he returned to the land of Lu to end his days there in 479 BC at the age of 72. He compiled and continued to teach the ancient texts. This brief account of his life suggests that he lived a relatively comfortable life where his ideas were collectively supported. But this was far from being the case. His journey, the term is strong but appropriate, leading him to the reputation he still has today, was strewn with pitfalls. During his time in the Song country, he was nearly assassinated by Huan Tue, the minister of war, who tried to throw a tree at him while he was teaching ancient texts in a woodland clearing. To illustrate his thoughts more precisely, I can offer you a few quotations from Confucius that stand out for me, on several themes. On the human condition, a man with a heart, a fully human man, does not seek to survive at the expense of his humanity. If necessary, he gives his life to preserve his humanity. On knowledge, learning without thinking is futile, thinking without learning is dangerous. On joy, man is born ready for pain, with a hereditary apparatus of transformation and resistance, the major component of which is joy. On poverty and wealth, it is more difficult to defend oneself from bitterness and poverty than from pride and opulence. On wisdom, for a word, a man is deemed wise, for a word, a man is deemed foolish. On self-development, some people weep when they learn that roses have thorns. Others rejoice when they know that thorns bear roses. On politics, there is no community except the illusion of being together. If you've had enough of this list of quotes, don't worry, it's almost over. It's funny to note that some of his quotes are still relevant today, and are even used by coaches. For example, they'll use the quote, "We have 2 lives, and the second begins when we realize we only have one," to stimulate the spirit of competition, the desire to succeed, to get involved, and so on. Personally, I find the quote, "Nature makes men alike. Life makes them different," is particularly beautiful, and it reveals profoundly the inequalities in our respective places in society that influence our lives, from our plans to our health. If you agree with me, don't hesitate to mention it in the comments, and take the opportunity to tell me which of the quotes I've mentioned was your favorite. What's more, to gain access to his teaching, every candidate had to pass the equivalent of an imperial examination, a meritocratic selection process for access to the bureaucracy of Imperial China, which existed from the year 605 to the end of the Qing dynasty in 1905. As you will have gathered, his legacy extends beyond China's borders. His philosophy led to the creation of books that are considered classics in China, Japan, and Korea. The one I find most meaningful is Anecdotes, a compilation of speeches by Confucius, his disciples, and discussions between them. Despite everything, this emblematic figure of ancient China remains conflicted. Indeed, we can see that many private Confucian schools have been set up in mainland China, while in the West there has been a real movement to deconstruct the figure.